Okay, this is recording 3, and Martin is hopping in the back of a truck to get to check out the new school. The back of his truck was filled with onions, potatoes, carrots, and kovo. Food for the dining hall, he explained. My mouth started watering. I was so relieved to be moving quickly again. 20 minutes later, we emerged from the forest and a lush green lawn unfurled before my eyes. We parked in front of a freshly painted building where dozens of guys in navy blue blazers, white shirts, and gray flannel pants were milling about. A few wore the cricket hats. I had made it. I hopped out of the truck, proud to be wearing a Caitlin shirt and my Nikes. I wasn't wearing a suit, but I fit in. I quickly found the headmaster's office and asked the secretary for a meeting. Mr. Musawazi will be back late tonight, she said. You can see him tomorrow morning. I'm due to head back to Mutare this evening, I explained. She suggested I speak with the deputy headmaster, Mr. Nyamendwi, right down the hall. I told him I wanted to do my A-levels at Marius Brothers. You and every other bright boy in Zimbabwe, he said, barely looking up from the papers on his desk. School starts next week, and we're full. It's impossible. There must be a way, I countered. We went back and forth. When he saw that I wouldn't take no for an answer, he said, Well then, I suggest you see the headmaster tomorrow. He's the only one who can find room for you. I wasn't planning to spend the night, I replied. Go introduce yourself to some of the students, he said. Someone will surely find you a bed. Thank you, sir, I said. I promise you will see me studying here this year. I don't see how, he said, shaking his head. Outside, I scanned the courtyard. All the students looked the same in their pristine uniforms. But then I noticed one kid wearing cheap sandals sold at the Sepkuva market we called rafters. All the others were wearing leather shoes or sneakers. As I made my way closer to this one guy, I overheard his accent, and I knew he was from the rural areas. He spoke as if he were singing, more lyrically than the tight and clipped way of the city people. When someone called him Rabbit, my hunch was confirmed. He was from the countryside, even worse than Chisamba Singles. He probably didn't even have electricity where he came from. He would understand my dilemma. I introduced myself and then told Rabbit my story. His eyes lit up. You must see the headmaster tomorrow, he said. He will listen. Rabbit told me that he also came from a very poor family, but was the top student at his school. I'm here on full scholarship, Rabbit said. The headmaster set the whole thing up. This made me hopeful. Rabbit gave me a campus tour. Each classroom had individual desks, and the library was bigger than the one I had snuck into all those months, lined with books, floor to ceiling. 24-hour access, Rabbit explained when he saw my eyes pop out from my head. The dorms were large rectangular rooms with 6 beds lining either side, a locker in between each. Rabbit took me to his. This is where you sleep? I asked. You can get used to a mattress, Martin, he said with a wink. I would like to, I replied, laughing. Last year I was eating 1 meal a day in Morongi, sleeping on dirt, he said. Next year I will go to medical school in Harar. That afternoon, Rabbit introduced me to many students. He was very popular. All the guys respected him. Every time he said, Meet my new friend Martin. He's coming to school here. I started to believe him. The dinner bell rang at 5 p.m. My stomach rumbled in response. I hadn't eaten since 7 a.m. I followed Rabbit and 2 friends to the huge dining hall, which had 12 long tables, 1 per dorm. Rabbit found an extra plate for me and grabbed 2 forks and knives. This made me nervous. I had never used silverware before. We ate with our hands at home. I kept my cool as we found our seats with 10 other guys. I could tell by their haircuts and shoes that they came from wealthy families. They appeared blasé about this place, like they expected life to be this way. Rabbit, however, remained amazed and amused. He knew poverty and privilege. A platter of steaming sadza came up first, followed by several heaping bowls of beans. My mouth was watering. but I waited for Rabbit to make the first move. He kept talking with his friends. Then the rice and kovo arrived. I'd never seen so much food on one table. One kid asked, "Any meat tonight?" The server replied, "Not tonight, but definitely tomorrow." The kid who had asked looked disappointed. I was speechless. Rabbit helped himself to everything and told me to do the same. I waited for Rabbit to start eating, to watch how to hold the fork. Mine felt clumsy in my hand. Rabbit must have sensed my discomfort because he said, "You can eat with your hands. No one will judge you." I looked around and saw every single kid using a fork. I tightened my grip and dug into the steaming pile of beans on my plate. Some fell onto my lap, but thankfully no one seemed to notice. I quickly picked them up and popped them into my mouth. The second try was more successful, and before long I had finished everything on my plate. Rabbit encouraged me to have more. After my third helping, I was so full my stomach ached. One guy noticed how much I ate and called me the bean eater. As we walked back to the dorm, two other guys said, "Oh, you were the kid who ate all the food." Everyone laughed, including me. I didn't mind. I still couldn't believe that much food was possible. We couldn't finish it all. I asked Rabbit what they did with the leftovers. "They throw it out," he said. "You and I know how crazy that is, but these guys have no clue." Most of the students were sons of judges, politicians, businessmen, and soccer stars. Their families lived in houses in Harar with maids and had not one but several cars. None of them had ever known hunger. I continued asking Rabbit all the questions bombarding my brain. I'd found the perfect guide. That night, Rabbit secured a bed for me in his dorm room. Another bell sounded, which meant it was time for quiet hours. Rabbit informed me that everyone got up at 6 a.m. Breakfast was at 7, followed by 8 o'clock church service on the lower campus. "The headmaster will be there," Rabbit said. "That's your chance." I thanked Rabbit for all his great help and said good night. As I lay down and pulled the covers up to my chin, I thought, this can't be happening. I had never slept on a mattress, let alone had my own linens. At home, I shared one thin blanket between two brothers. These sheets felt crisp and cool on my skin, and the blanket was heavy yet soft. It warmed me immediately as I pulled it up, all the way to my chin. I closed my eyes and listened to the faint breathing of my roommates as I drifted into one of the deepest sleeps ever. A siren startled me awake. I hopped out of my bed and followed Rabbit to the showers. I turned on the spigot and laughed out loud when warm water came rushing out. I had only ever bathed with cold water before. Rabbit laughed as well, the only person in the room who understood what was so funny. Breakfast was eggs, toast, and pork. Beans were one thing, but eggs were even a bigger luxury and unheard of where I came from. And yet there I was, helping myself to not one, but two. I turned to Rabbit before I began to eat and said, "I love this place." Mass took place in an old stone church with all the students on both the lower and the upper campuses. Following the sermon, a large man with a big bushy beard and matching afro that floated on top of his head like a crown approached the podium. Rabbit elbowed me. "That's him," he whispered. As soon as everyone was dismissed, I went looking for this formidable man. He was outside the church chatting with students. Everyone else was in a suit and tie, so I stood out in my Nike shirt and shoes. When Mr. Muzawazi spotted me, he said, "You must be Martin Gonda. Follow me." We walked to his office where several people were already waiting to see him. I took a seat and waited until his secretary called my name. As I walked into his office, he asked, "I hear you wanted to see me?" "Yes, sir. I want to do my A-levels here." I started to explain, but he cut me off. "You're too late. We're already filled up," he said. "Besides, there are many qualified students here who need to get in. We don't even have space for them." "I've come all the way from Chisamba Singles to speak to you," I countered. "Please give me a chance." That quieted him. "I have an uncle that lives near." Oops, sorry. "I have an uncle that lives near there," he said. "That's a tough place." I saw that he was impressed, and I just kept building up on that. I told him that I had been kicked out of school time and time again for lack of fees, and still managed to graduate #1 in my class. Okay, let's look at your grades, he said. As I handed him the envelope, I said, I got the highest grade in my school, and in all of Mutare, too. How did you do this from Tsukuba? He asked. Hard work and study, sir, I explained. What does your father do? He asked. I think he expected me to say teacher, so when I said that my father lost his factory job after 16 years of dedicated work, Mr. Musawazi was even more surprised. I explained that my parents didn't even finish their O-levels, and that they were barely literate, and I added what I knew was the urgent truth, that I was their only hope. As I spoke, I felt a big ball of emotion forming in my chest. Sir, I said finally, this is my only chance. If you don't allow me this opportunity, I'll die a poor man. And if you do come here, what next? He asked, his tone softening. I want to go to university, I explained. I have young siblings. We're sharing one room. There's barely enough space for us to sleep, let alone for me to study. Okay, he said. Get me a deposit by tomorrow at 5 p.m., and I'll find room for you. My mind started reeling. How much? I asked. 1,000 Zimbabwe dollars will secure you a spot, he said. The rest will be payable by the middle of March. The deposit alone was 4 months' rent, impossible to access in 24 hours. We didn't even have that in our savings, which was already earmarked for living expenses. I thought of asking Caitlin, but she was too far to get the money so quickly. Then I thought of Alois. He worked in a bank. He may be willing to help. It was my only chance. I can do that, I said, reaching out my hand to shake on it. Then you will be a student here, he said. He knew he was asking me to do the impossible, but he also believed in me. I thanked the headmaster and ran out of his office. It was 11 a.m., and I was in the middle of nowhere. There was a lot to accomplish in 30 hours. I quickly caught a ride to Nyanga and hopped a bus back to Mutare. When I arrived home, I told my parents everything, and then went to call Alois from the post office. I tried him at home first. No answer. Then I tried his cell. No answer. I tried him at home again, and was thrilled when I heard, Hello? Alois, it's Martin, I said, and then breathlessly recounted the entire situation, from getting the highest O-level scores to the headmaster's offer. I promise to repay you, cousin. Let me see what I can do, he said. They need it by tomorrow, I explained. School starts the following day. What else do you need? He asked. The headmaster gave me a list of supplies required to attend Marius Brothers, which included the uniform and a specific trunk, all of which I needed by Tuesday. After I rattled off everything on my list, I heard Alois speak to Seki. You are in luck, his voice boomed through the receiver. Seki can come to Mutare tomorrow morning to help gather all these things. Fantastic, I shouted. Seki and Alois understood how important this was. The next morning, Seki stepped off the bus looking as beautiful and vibrant as I remember her. We have a lot to do, cousin, she said. Let's go. Seki was paying for everything, so I had already crossed off unnecessary items, like the tracksuit, the extra shirt, and the lace-up shoes. I had to get the black metallic trunk to store my personal belongings. Everyone had one, including Rabbit. Back home, I filled it with a few clothes from Caitlin, notebooks, and a blanket my mother had secured for me. I traded this for work, she said. My mom had picked up a part-time job working as a maid for a wealthy family. I didn't know how many hours it would take her to pay off such a lovely thing, but it became my most prized possession and connection to her. I packed my Walkman, a few cassette tapes, and a dozen or more of Caitlin's photos. After dinner, I walked Seki to the station to say goodbye. Alois is very proud of you, Martin, she said right before she boarded the bus. He'll do his best to get the deposit in time. Okay, that's the end of recording number 3. I'll be back.